Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I am your host, Rhyland, and today we're talking about ambition with Jodi Toews. So Jodi Toews was a fellow coworker of mine at Focus Fitness. That's where I first met her, and that was the first training job I had. And she was one of the vets there when I was there. She had been there for a few years, and she has a really interesting story where she came from fine arts, moved into athletic therapy, and then moved back into creative design with her own company. She even moved out west because she just knew she wanted to live in the mountains. And when I worked with Jodi, it was so clear to me that this woman worked hard. And I aspired to be a trainer like she was because she was always occupied, always doing something. And I really appreciated that mindset that I could see in her. So you'll see in this conversation kind of where some of that comes from. She doesn't actually see herself as necessarily being an ambitious person, but there's some very good lessons to have here as far as what makes it clear for a person to be able to be driven. So without further ado, here is Jodi Toews. Good day, Jodi. How you doing?
I'm good, Rhyland. How are you?
I'm great. It's been a minute, eh?
It has a minute or a few years.
Yeah, several years. So, no, I'm so pumped to have you on. I give a pretty rough kind of introduction to how I know you prior, but why don't we dive right into this? Why don't you tell the viewers or listeners about, who you are and your kind of history?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm very honored to be on your show. This is great. So, like you said, my name is Jodi, and kind of my history is I grew up in Manitoba, small town. And then Rhyland and I met each other at Focus Fitness, so that was in Winnipeg. And I did my undergrad in athletic therapy, so I was an athletic therapist for about 10 years, and that was like a real mix of being a strength coach. I did some like casting technician, like ortho tech positions. And then I ended up at the knee clinic at University of Calgary. So I ended up specializing in knee injuries. And so then I spent 5 years there. And then after 5 years doing that, I decided to quit. I retired as a therapist, and I switched into a career in graphic design. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. Now I own my own business, and it's called Jodi Toews Design.
Wow. Yeah, and that's just quite a road, and you summarized that quite quickly. Let's start at the start because I always love to hear kind of that upbringing story. And when you had said small town, that really resonated with me because I grew up in the country as well. So, what town did you grow up in?
I grew up in Killarney, Manitoba, very small, right on the Canada-US border. It's farming
Nice.
community. Yeah.
And so, when did you move out of your small town?
Yeah, so like all small town kids, I mean, you hit 18 and you either stay or you piece out to do your post-secondary education. So for me, I went and played volleyball in Missouri for a couple of years. So I was just like a student athlete, and I actually was seeking fine arts. So that's kind of my shift out of the small town is actually into the States. And then I was injured as a volleyball player and then ended up coming back to U of M and did my degree at the University of Manitoba.
So, what was that like, that kind of evolution? I know for me, when you grow up in small town, you know that there's just different culture, right? And different kind of lessons that you kind of learn. What kind of lessons did you feel? What kind of a culture did you kind of gravitate to?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I feel like it definitely shaped who I am today, and even probably where I am today, like just location wise. I'm back in a smaller town. Um, but like I had the best childhood. I mean, I didn't even grow up in town. I actually grew up on an acreage, but we weren't farmers. So I mean, like I had acres and acres and miles of land to play in, like creeks and biking. Like I just grew up super active because I just had all this space to go explore. And my parents were very much like active and like to explore as well. My mom's the explorer, my dad's like the adrenaline junkie. So there's like two different things there, but they definitely like to play and they definitely instilled that in their kids.
I think that's so powerful. So what was your kind of motivation? Like, how did you know I got to stick to this? Was it the passion? Was it your belief in some way?
Yeah, I just loved playing volleyball. Honestly, I just loved the sport. And so I think when I know what I want and I knew I didn't want to live in a small town forever, not that small towns are bad, it's just that's just not where I wanted to be long term. And I saw other girls playing volleyball at a university level. Like, I want that. And when I saw what I wanted, you really couldn't tell me I couldn't have it.
Yeah, no, and it's funny, growing up in the small town, all you want to do is grow out of it, and then when you're an adult, and then you're like, man, I got to get back to a small town,
Yes, that's exactly what happened. Where I was like, oh, I need to be out of the small town. I need this different experience. And then I was in a city and like, nope, I'm so over the city. I need to go back to a small town.
Yeah, I feel like the city's effective when you're like basically about 19 to late 20s, and then it's like I'm pretty tired of it. I need to get more sleep. So you're this is a really good course I want to take because you're talking about your ambition and your drive. So what were some big moments for you that like, hey, I'm gonna take this serious? What really flipped that switch for you?
I think like when I was in grade 9, and I don't even really remember how it happened. I'd started playing a little bit of volleyball, and then one of the club coaches from Burden actually, he ended up talking to my coach and just being like, "Hey, I want that girl to play on my team." We're like, "What can you tell me about this player?" And so just having kind of like that invite into a different realm or into like this like larger pool of players, that was kind of pivotal because it opened my eyes to what was possible. I hadn't seen what was out there yet, and being like tossed into this club scenario where you're competing with urban teams, not just your rural like small town sports. That was kind of eye opening because it just opened up the boundaries and what was possible.
Yeah, it just makes the small world big, right? So that's super exciting. Now, with that led to your big careers and your career changes. So can you talk a little bit of how you went into those career changes going from fine arts into AT?
Yeah, so the switching to AT from fine arts was, it might kind of sound funny, but I was always told I had really good hands. So like if anyone was going to ask for a massage on our team, they would always ask me, like, can you give me a massage? Like you kind of end up like that role where it's just like I just had good hands, and that was the feedback I got from people. And then I was also injured, and it wasn't a serious injury, but it just wasn't managed super effectively. So it was kind of one of those ones where it's like, had you just taken the time off and done the proper rehab, you would have been back into your sport super quick or within like a normal time frame. But instead, I had this like nagging, awkward season where I ended up doing a medical red shirt because it just wasn't healing. It was like an ab strain, which I just feel like is not that serious of an injury. injury. It shouldn't be like a season ender. And so just through my experience in that, and being told I had good hands, and then my mom too was always like, you should be a physiotherapist. But I didn't want to work with the older population. I decided that I was like, you know what? I'm not really into playing volleyball anymore. It wasn't fun. And I thought there was probably a better way for injuries to be managed as well. And so I basically came home at Christmas and was like, I'm going to apply for athletic therapy at U of M. And I applied, had to wait like 6 months to get in. And then I got in, and it was kind of like smooth sailing, smooth sailing after that, or like into that next career anyway.
Yeah, so just that it's usually, it's the experience that in some way all of a sudden you're like, yeah, this kind of makes sense, and you have that moment where you're like, I could take a different path. And
Yeah.
so you dove into AT, and then let's continue with that story a little bit more. And one of the things I also was curious about was just the experience of going through that schooling because I went through kinesiology, which is
Mhm.
basically like AT, but not as hard. And so it's like, because it's just like the course load is lighter. You don't got to know about all the injuries. But then when I left my degree, I was like, man, I wish I would have just done AT. So why don't you talk a little bit about that schooling and the process of getting involved in the industry?
Yeah. I mean, the schooling was hard. It was, if you want to learn how to work, well, there's a program for you, because you're basically taking a full course load and then you're required to do like, I don't know, I think I was almost working like 30 hours a week on top of taking the full course load because of the practicum hours that were required in the program. So you were really busy all the time. I don't think that's healthy. I think I look back at that. It took me like 2 years to almost recover from that schooling, that program. I was so burnt out coming out of it. And I definitely, sometimes I'm like, I regret that I'd taken ET. But I look back at it and I was like, that was just such a necessary challenge. Like I learned so much because you learn so much academically, but then you also, as a therapist, you just learn so much about people. And you also learn about yourself because you're treating people. So yeah, it was pretty stressful.
Yeah.
I still got married like right after. I like graduated certified and was married, I think within like a month. So it was like planning a wedding while you're trying to graduate and trying to certify, and it was bad choices being made all around.
Yeah.
Like, Billy, why did you try to do all of that at once? Like, just take your time.
Well, and it's when you look back at the life you lived, I find that, especially in the, young adulthood, it's about defining yourself. So you rush to do it, right? And one of the things that we really kind of get involved in is more is more. And it's not really true because once you get older, you're like, whoa, you're not sleeping much and you're not really doing more. You're just doing a whole lot of shit, right? Because you're tired, you're trying to grind through it. And like, I mean, I can't agree anymore with just the whole system of, I don't think any education should force people to work those hours because the amount of skill that you develop in there is marginal, right? Because you're regurgitating everything on page, and then what can you actually pull out, 2 to 3 years later, right?
You're just learning how to take a test. Like that's how I found the education was like I learned how to take a test. I learned how to get a good grade, but I didn't really learn critical thinking. The critical thinking actually, for me, that was really pivotal when I started at the knee injury clinic, was the critical thinking piece. Because up until that point, I mean, yes, focus, like we were still learning. I think as a group, we were always learning and we were trying to figure things out and just be better. But there wasn't the same, like the knee clinic position I had, there was a ton of accountability and mentorship like built into that program and into that training. And that's where I learned, and I was challenged every day. It was like, why did you make that decision? The question was literally asked, why did you make that decision? Which you're not asked that very often in a university program. I don't know, were you ever asked like, well, why did you do it that way?
No, and a lot of the times, well, you know what? I would say there was one prof I had who she actually would say, "If you can argue why, I'll give you marks," which I appreciated. Which most profs should do when you go into a lot of these research-based questions that could be argued. But when it has to do with like applied learning, there should always be a why, and it doesn't have to be a right or wrong answer. And that's like I love that you had that experience because that's really, like you say, critical thinking, problem solving is the real life. And I learned way more within my years at Focus Fitness than I did my whole degree, just because you understand the application principles and then the problem solving, like you say, an individual, what they can't do this, well, they can't do that. So you went, and this was an interesting transition because you were at Focus, you were working hard, and then you went to this knee clinic. So what was that shift like for you and Krista, your husband? You guys you decided to make that big move.
Yeah, well, it came with, for me, I definitely wanted to move west, and I convinced Krista that he wanted to move west as well. Krista's my husband. I finally I just like chipped away at it, and eventually he was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So anyway, so I eventually was just like, we're moving out west. I just want to be closer to mountains. And typically if I like vocalize a decision, like this is what I want, it usually happens in some way, shape, or form. I kind of look back at like key moments where I was like, I was very specific about what I wanted. and I verbalized it, and then somehow those things just like the opportunities presented themselves. So with the knee clinic, basically there was an opportunity that that came up through like an athletic therapy email list, just saying like, hey, do you want to learn more about knees? I didn't really care about the knees part. I will be totally honest with you. It was not like, oh, hey, knees sound super interesting. It was oh, it's in Calgary. It was actually the location piece. And then also the fact that it was like a learning opportunity. Because I think at that point, I just really wanted to be good at something. For me, it's just so fulfilling to actually feel like you know something well, you can critically think through a problem, and then you can actually provide someone with a really quality service. That to me is quite fulfilling. So with the knee clinic, they called me and I flew out there for an interview and had to like juggle things because you're not making very much money at Focus at that point. You're just like, how am I going to afford a flight out to Calgary? Family totally supported me in doing that. And then like a month or two later, I had to go out there and I trained. So I actually trained for 3 months first, not really knowing that there was a job at the end of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big leap. That's a big leap.
But I just knew I wanted to be in the mountains. Like that was the driving factor. Like, I don't care what we need to do, but like this is happening. We'll just figure it out. And then after, you start jumping into like, you're jumping through hoops and things are happening, the reality sinks in and you're just like, oh shit, what did I do? Like, what did I just say yes to?
Well, that's incredible. You're talking about like the secret there, It's just that, basically just the idea of making your mindset, saying it out loud, making it come true. But,
Yeah.
I don't think it works like that. But what you have about you, and I mean, I noticed this working with you all those years, is that you're a hustler. Like you can't be bored, right? Like this is just something that very much is a part of you as an identity. So it's like you weren't going to go out there and drag ass. You're going to make it work, right? That's a part of who you are. So you're out in Calgary, and what was that transition once you're there? When did you start to feel like you really had your feet underneath you?
Oh man, I feel like it took me a while. My job in the knee clinic, because there was so much accountability and mentorship and just the level of expertise and professionalism that was required in that position, it took me like a year before I felt like I'd actually started to get comfortable. And that was just a year in like the technical skills. And then it took me probably another year of just like soft skills. And the soft skills is like being able to relate to each patient and adjust how I interacted with each person while still doing my job. Because my job was really based around a lot of efficiency. There were not a lot of open-ended questions. I was asking a lot of closed-ended questions because I just needed certain information. And so it took like 2 years to actually become really proficient in doing what I was doing. And then that's when the boredom sets in. You get good at something, I'm like, now I'm bored.
Well, it's funny. That's kind of how, like, I believe an ambitious mind would kind of work. Well, I mean, when you first start something, this was a really great thing that I had one of my clients say to me because I was just starting out at United as a manager and I was, stressing about not knowing what I was doing. And there was no blueprint. They didn't have this position before. But he's like, man, no one's good at their job in the first year. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Because if I ever think of any job I ever started, I sucked for the good portion at the start. Then you get kind of good after a few months, and then you get good-ish after a year, and it's like a humbling process. But like you say, then once you've done that for about a year or two, and I usually find around that second, third year where you're like, can I grow? It's like
Yeah.
it's almost like growth mindset, right?
Yeah, that is exactly the question, is like, where is the room for growth here? I think for me, as soon as I realize that there's no room for growth, that's usually when I usually pivot or exit the scenario if there's no more room to grow.
So when you say pivot, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that's where I started looking at different options from like a career switch standpoint. So once I become really proficient in my job in the knee injury clinic, then you start to look at like, can I get paid more for doing what I'm doing? Like, can I move up in this position? Can my job change to have more responsibilities or to, like, I don't know, be more fulfilling? And if the answer to those questions is no, then I start looking for other options. And so for me at that point, I think I was a little bit older. I was starting to do a lot more reading in terms of just like personal development. And I also was really clear in terms of like, well, Calgary's awesome, but the mountains are still like an hour and a half away. Like, that's too far. And so at that point, I'm like, well, I actually want to work. Like, I started to have a better understanding of what I wanted for a lifestyle. And so for me, like, time in the mountains, having free time, I'm a great worker, but I'm a bad employee. So, like, I want a lot more autonomy. I don't want to be told what to do all the time, especially if I disagree. So maybe I'm a little bit headstrong that way. And so I started being like, okay, well, what's my end goal and how do I reverse engineer that? Because where I am it's not going to cut it.
It's a great way to put it, that the reverse engineer. And I think not a lot of people, like, as you made it very clear to yourself, you want to be in the mountains. When it comes to career and lifestyle, it's actually kind of hard question for people to ask. Like,
Yeah.
The older I get, the better I am at answering it. But when you're young, it's like, well, I don't even talking about a 5-year plan. I'm afraid of next year, right? And so to reverse engineer anything, even for myself, it's like I just want to keep helping in some way in this realm. But it eventually becomes more and more like, no, there could be something here that I could really grow in. And I think what you had talked about was so important was this growth mindset. And I don't think a lot of people realize that there are some who have it and some who don't. Like, and if you don't foster it, you're going to be kind of like, I'm not sure if there's a term for these people, but like the people who really actually are okay with just kind of cyclically living the same life, doing the same kind of job, 9 to 5, they know they're getting their pension, so they're good. But then there's a growth mindset like yourself, and I'm on board with this, is like, if it does not feel like I can move forward in it, why do I keep doing it? Right?
Yeah, unless you're like intrinsically motivated by that experience itself, then it might make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, like, I mean, so that's basically your story, and we kind of dove into that. But I want to peel back a little bit of where do you feel were some of the big moments for you as far as like, becoming an ambitious person. Like, what were some of your influences that like ensured that, I got to make sure I keep my game going? What keeps you driven in this process?
Well, I was like, I don't always necessarily see myself as that ambitious. I feel like I'm just focused, like I just know what I want. But I think that's kind of what it stems from, is like, once I know what I want, it's pretty hard to stop me, even if I fail over and over again. And I might sometimes quit, or like have to walk away and come back the next day. But I'm usually pretty clear on what I want. And I don't know if that's something that not everyone knows what they want, honestly. Like, I've definitely had that conversation with people where they're like, I don't really know what I want. I'm like, well, I do. And so that's like, I'm not necessarily ambitious. I think I just know what I want.
That's a powerful thing, yeah, right? To be very clear on your mission. But even as you had said, is like, I might have to, rinse and repeat, get up, get down, get up. And like, I think, and the other major thing is you say focus. Like, I like how you don't look at, because this is a big problem for a lot of people, is they want motivation, right? How do I get this done? I need motivation. But it's like, it's not about motivation, right? It's not about the motive. Certainly there are some factors that'll motivate you at times, but motivation is an emotion. It's very wavering, right? But like, as you had said, you stay focused. It's more in the process, and you enjoy that process of being focused, going after tasks, knowing what you want. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would say I'm still process focused. I think that's something we joke about at our household, is that I'm just like, I want the end goal. And I do not make that process look graceful. I struggle through a lot of those things of like getting to where I want to go. I definitely don't make it look easy, I don't think. That's just my perspective on it. Um, but but obviously there's this part of me that really enjoys overcoming the challenge. Like clearly that plays a role or is important or fulfilling for me because I tend to I'm attracted to those like challenges. I mean, that's the reason why I mountain bike. It's the reason why I snowboard. You know, I pick up those recreational activities that challenge me. They're scary. They require that ability to like fail and try again. And I think even with running a business and like going out on your own, is I think I'm attracted to doing things that are scary because it's really fulfilling when you do it even though you're scared.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
the fear doesn't go away. It's just that you get better at like not hesitating and just doing it anyway. Like feel the fear and do it anyway.
Right. And I think that right there is a very important thing. And I'll even come back to what you're saying. Not necessarily saying that you're process driven, but what I'm saying it's your act of just handling the process.
Mm,
Because that's where people want motivation to put them into it. And what you
right.
had just said was important. It's like, well, I don't wait for it. Like I don't care. I'm scared, I'm gonna do it. I'm angry, I'm gonna do it. Like I'm gonna
Yeah.
focus on it. And I
Yeah.
think this is a very important thing. So I had this sports psychologist, Jason Brooks, on, and he talks about neutral thinking. It's not having a debate with yourself whether to do something or to not do something. It is, you're going to hear these negative thoughts. I could do this, I could do that. Oh, that's fine. Do it. And then,
Yeah.
like, just, and every time, like you had just said, whether it's fear, doubt, hesitation, debating with yourself whether or not you want to do it, but when you can get used to hearing that but then doing it anyways, and
Mhm.
that in itself becomes your character trait. And I think this is a big thing that a lot of people don't realize. You hear the sounds, everyone hears these sounds, but it's how you handle that perseverance. What were some really big moments for you that you had to really bear down and ignore the sounds and grind through?
Actually right before we moved to Revelstoke, because Revelstoke is like basically a dream location for Krista and I. This is we were kind of on like a 5-year plan to get here, and then COVID hit, and that became a 6-week timeline instead of our 5-year plan. It really accelerated everything for us. There was a nagging voice in the back of my head before we moved that was just like, "Don't do it. You're gonna cut ties to this city that has clients that you're gonna need." Like it, there was definitely this voice of fear, um, but I just ignored it. But it was strong. Like honestly, recently that's probably been like one of the bigger ones. But I think you just practice, you start small, right? You just start small, practicing like doing something that's small and scary, and then it gets easier.
Yeah, and it's a practice, right?
It's
And
good to
and it
have it.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think, as you had said, even with your lifestyle choices, with the sports that you choose, with the activities you choose, you have those voices come in all the time. And you just got to remember it's the same kind of voice just making you hesitant to do something, which,
Oh yeah.
when whether you're talking about a life career choice or, certain sports like that can be very intense. Like they're scary, right?
Oh
So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, you look down at something and you're just like, I can see a million different ways here how I'm gonna break something. Like, but am I going to choose to do this or not? I'm like, realistically, it'll be fine. I'm like, you just got to do it. And it usually is fine.
so when you describe that, what kind of event was that? Was that mountain
Oh,
biking
like,
or?
I'm just talking about like pretty much every time you're out on a bike. For
Yeah.
me, it's like mountain biking has been, it's kind of paralleled my personal growth. So my mountain biking skill level has paralleled my like personal growth journey. They're very intertwined. Maybe that's just why I love this sport so much. And yet like battle with it. It's like kind of that love-hate relationship because you just get on steep things where there's rocks and there's roots and you don't always trust your bike to do what it's supposed to do, and you don't trust your body to do what it's supposed to do, but I'm like, but I want to ride that. And so it doesn't always happen the first time I see something on a feature or on a trail. um, but it's been really interesting to watch, to see my ability to like push through the fear in the sport of biking actually, and how that kind of just like matches what I'm doing in my personal life. It might sound funny, but there's like a very close relationship to those
Oh
two
no,
things.
that it makes a lot of sense. Sports should really apply to your personality a lot. I mean, I know from boxing, it completely transferred me as far as I was a lazy kid. I was a super lazy kid, and then boxing completely transformed that. And it was an evolution over time. And I would say it's very similar. It's like my career and my sport identity evolved quite similarly. So when did you start getting into mountain biking and start to have to deal with that? Because I think that's a really interesting how they coincided so much.
Yeah, I think like when we moved to Calgary, that was really pivotal. Like I think I all of a sudden learned that I could make decisions and I wasn't stuck. That was actually quite impactful. And then that's basically when I started biking was Calgary as well, because it's hard not to. You have access to just like world class trails and terrain. But it took me 3 years to probably not be like, yeah, it took me 3 years to not be scared every time I was out biking. And that kind of is how my like going from an athletic therapist to a graphic designer too is like kind of at that 3 year mark when all of a sudden I started making decisions to retire as a therapist and actually to make the full leap into graphic design.
Yeah, and that's such a cool leap. Was that transition like was it a year long period, 2 year long period? Like was it pretty gritty
Yeah.
for you?
I started taking graphic design courses in like 2016 or 17, something like that. Um, just to kind of like understand the skill set a bit better and like the software. And then in 2019, that's when I quit my job. And so I had started to like I was very very honest with my boss that I was planning on eventually like living in a mountain town and transitioning to a different career. But when I actually quit therapy and was like, oh, I'm not going to the clinic anymore, and I was just doing business. Um, it was a rough first like 6 months. It was awesome, and it was rough because I just felt like I don't know. It's like one of those things where it takes you a year to get good at something. I think business takes way longer than that.
Yeah.
I was like, this is like full on, full on. And I ended up getting a coach within like the first 3 4 months, like a business coach, because I was just like, man, I don't know how to do this by myself, and I clearly need some help. And that was really helpful for me. I saw coaching help me so many times, like in my position as a strength coach, like having a mentor there made my results like accelerated my results. Then I went to the knee clinic, having mentors there just accelerated my results and my ability to be good at something. Then I had some mountain bike coaching and I watched that just accelerate my results as well, being like, oh, when someone watches you and tells you what to do, it's really helpful. And so I was like, well, that should apply to business too. And so once I had a business coach, I felt like I felt way more supported. Um, and I feel like I've just come a long way since I got some mentorship there.
It's such a game changer,
Yeah.
and especially with when you can start any business, and even if you have a business that you go to school for, it doesn't mean that coaching and these things aren't going to help you. It like you had said, it's someone commenting, and especially it's scary being like your own business, like you're an entrepreneur, like you have no boss, you have no one telling you that you're fucking up. It's like you just kind of got to know that you are, and you need that point of accountability, but also someone to say, hey, you're actually on the right path, you just got to keep grinding. Like sometimes you need a little bit of both, need a bit of love, a little support, a little bit of grit, and it makes such a difference. And even for myself as a trainer, when I was at Focus Fitness, I had a room of you guys, and I just fucking wasted my time because I was training myself, and I dug myself a fucking grave of injuries because I was constantly overtraining because
Oh
I
yeah.
didn't. No one wrote it in the textbook. More is not more, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like, I would love to know this question. So, you're pretty successful now. You've gone through a lot of grit and stuff like that. If you were to give some advice on someone like yourself, and I don't want to say like go to previous you because I always believe going in the past, you want to believe the grit was all worth it. But if you were to talk to a younger version of someone like you, what's some main advice that you would give them to try to take a similar ability of a career path?
Um, I I honestly just wish that someone would have asked me how I wanted to live versus what I wanted to do. Because for me, that's been the motivating factor. Is like, well, what do you want your life to look like? If you're an AT and you're working 3 jobs, and all of a sudden like your relationship with your spouse or your partner falls apart because you're overworking yourself, um, or you like have no time to do things that you love to do. Like, oh, I'd love to take up boxing. I'd love to actually take care of myself, but I'm working 3 jobs, doing this thing that I love. Um, it really gets you nowhere. Again, it's kind of like that reverse engineering thing. And so I really wish someone would have asked me, like, what do you want your life to look like? And like your life as a whole, not just what do you want your career to look like.
That's powerful. Makes me even really rethink how I look at my future. But I mean, I've been doing that a bit more.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff I've been working with Gavin, and it's very important to ask yourself that question. Like, especially if people are afraid to ask it like truly deeply. Like, what do you truly deeply want your life to look like? Waking up, like, how do you feel? Do you have to rush to work? Like, do you like that? And that how to live is a very powerful thing. I really like that. Good wisdom
Mhm.
there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Uh, who would you say has been who are your greatest inspiration, or multiple? Who are some people who really influenced you in time?
Yeah, I saw that question on the sheet and I was like, man, I was never one of those kids that had like heroes or anything like that. Um, Probably why I'm not a good spectator either. Like I don't really watch sports or anything. I never know who people are because I'm just too busy like trying it for myself or like on my own. But I definitely had people that were key in terms of teaching me and mentoring me for sure. One was actually was a volleyball coach. I was lucky enough to like move to our town from the city when I was in grade 11, and he's actually the one that introduced me to strength training. Um, and I just saw like crazy results from strength training, and I just like became addicted to being strong. So he was definitely like a key person. Obviously, my parents were key people as well. They just instilled that like playfulness and that exploration, and they really encouraged me to go get what I wanted, essentially. And then in the knee clinic, I had some really good mentors there as well. And actually, my mentor is now also my colleague and my business partner with another business that I own with her as well. So she's been super influential. Her name's Meryl. She was a really tough mentor to please. She's really like cracked the whip, but I learned so much from her. And then there was actually another physician that taught me a lot of soft skills that were really influential. And then I feel like this is like a thank you speech. But obviously, like Krister is so supportive and just gives me a lot of freedom and just supports me. Like if I said, hey, I want to quit my job, he's like, yeah, you've been complaining about this for a while. He's like, if you give me a business plan, you can quit your job. And I was like, well, I can do that. Like, is that really all it took for you to like completely agree with this plan? And so I was like, it's in my head. And so I literally wrote it down and handed him the business plan. It's like, can I quit now? Like, is this family decision official? So he's just like, he's crazy, like crazy supportive. And obviously now we're working together in business as well. So he's my web developer.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a huge part, is that if someone in your environment is a part of your support and inspiration, I think that's a game changer. So that's really cool. And
Yeah.
so as this is the Strong Ambition podcast, what has got you recently very ambitious? What are you going after? What's a big ambition of yours?
Oh, um, I have a few mountain biking specific goals that will probably mean nothing to anyone because it's all full of like mountain bike jargon. But there's just a few different features, like things to like jump your bike off of and like different like levels of difficulty trails to ride that I'd like to be able to master this summer. So I'm pretty stoked about that. And then from a business standpoint, I'm really just kind of focused on the next level of growing my business, which might mean hiring more people, maybe staying the same, just trying to figure out how to build capacity in my business is actually one of the main focuses for me right now.
Cool. And that's a really hard part, right? It's
Yeah.
how many years have you been on your own now?
It's only been 2. Yeah, so I'm still pretty like fresh in the game from like a business owner standpoint. I can never imagine going back. Like I said, good worker, not a good employee.
I feel you. But I would say like I wouldn't say that I was necessarily depending on who I work for. I could be a terrible employee,
Yeah.
but I actually really appreciate the structure. But waking up like work's not work. It's just who you are and what you do is like a priceless feeling,
Yeah.
right? It's just you wake up to get things done for your identity and your brand. It's you just can't put a price tag on that. So
Yeah.
it's I remember someone had said this. It's the bipolar lifestyle of an entrepreneur. So it's high highs and low lows, and there's nothing
Yeah.
in between, right?
Yeah,
'Cause-
I feel like I must have been built for that because I am a fly and diver. We usually use this like this is what I do. I experience the full spectrum of emotions. Yeah.
yeah, because like when it's good, it's awesome, and then
Yeah.
when it's not good, you're just everything's
Just
pissing you off.
you just feel like you're in the rock bottom sometimes, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, it's
yeah,
not all
and
rainbows and roses.
no, and it literally is. It just depends on the day. Like you have some good sales, and then you're on top of the world. Like
Yeah.
you're the king of the world, queen of the world, and then you don't get on sales for a little while, and it gets a little dry, and then you just whoa, who am I? What am I doing
I
with my
think
life?
I think that's one of the interesting things about being an entrepreneur and being a business owner is like, so I say I'm not like a process person, but I think you grow so much through that process of like learning how to maybe let go of sometimes the results or like let go of the results defining you and just learning how to be you and like do you and yeah, there's just something fulfilling about that process of managing the highs and lows and trying
Yeah,
to stay, within the bumpers, like trying
yeah,
to mellow out a little bit.
totally.
Yeah,
To make it so that like you got to look at big picture, right? So it's like
yeah,
when you have a high high, I actually pull myself down, and
yeah,
then when I have a low low, it's like remember that it's not going to stay like this. Just
yeah,
ride the tide,
yeah,
and I really love the just as long as you appreciate your craft, stay focused on your craft and say, whether your client list is high or low, no matter what, you stay so focused on what you're doing for the individual, it's going to drive you, right? And even clients who currently have continue to try to help them more and more,
yeah,
and then it's a pretty clear road, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. When you can like shift the focus from you onto your clients and be like, how do I serve them better? Yeah.
yeah, way more motivating. Well, this was a wonderful conversation, Jodi. It
Thanks
was
for having me
great.
again.
It was a lot of fun. We'll have to catch up again soon sometime. There was a lot to unpack there. Good 6 years of not getting a chance to chat, but honestly, some great stuff. I really love hearing this kind of perspective of your mindset. You have a very powerful, driven mindset, and I always saw that in you when I worked with you, and so it was really cool to understand where all of this comes from.
Man, it's so funny to hear people say that because I don't necessarily see myself as like being driven. So it's funny to me that you saw me as being like ambitious and driven 6 years ago. Because I'm like, oh, I don't feel like I was that driven or ambitious. But thank you.
Well, but I mean, I think a lot of people are like that are hardworking, right? You're always going to look at something a little bit harder, right? And I was lazy back then too, so it didn't take much to impress me, but
There, that's brilliant.
that was a bit of it. But no, you're always someone who wanted to be busy, always wanted to be involved in things, and that's an important character that I think is really cool because it's paid off for you. It's done great well for you. So
Yeah. Well, thank you.
thank you. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks again to Jodi Toews. That was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it because hearing her determined mindset is what I would really call it, because she's very goal-oriented. I want to get there. I want to get that. She said that a few times. And, everyone that you hear on these podcasts have different things that motivate them to do these extraordinary things. And that was her concept, is I want to get that. And so she doesn't care if she doesn't like the process, she'll get there. And then her reverse engineer mindset was beautiful, really profound, to think of, how do you want to live? And I think too many of us will ask, what do you want to do when you grow up? When really it should be more of, how do you want to live? And what are you going to do when you're there? Start with the how. How do you want that occupation to fit your life, not make your life fit your occupation so much? And I think it's a really cool perspective, because then you can reverse engineer your life towards that goal. And she stayed determined on that. And I think it's really great to see how this story is unfolded. And for you to know more about Jodi Toews and how she might be able to help you, and appreciate, like I said, she was one of the hardest workers I saw in the gym, and she was an excellent strength and conditioning coach and athletic therapist, and she left that to go into design. So I know she's going to put her heart into this. And so Jodi Toews Design is a graphic design studio focused on bringing business owners in health and exercise science industry build strong, clear brands they're excited to share. They do this through strategic branding, logos, and websites. You can follow them on Instagram by looking up at Jodi Toews Design, or check out the website www.joditoews.ca. And Toews is spelled Toews. A little unique, but check out the show notes for the links and the proper spelling. And thank you so much for listening today. I really appreciate it. Like, subscribe, and definitely share this, because I think there's a great message to be shared here between the determined mindset, but also how do you want to live mindset, especially someone who maybe isn't enjoying their life and has to consider that aspect. And maybe this listen to could be some inspiring thought for them to rethink about how they want to live their life and how to go about actually being courageous enough to changing what they're going to do with their career. So thanks again for listening today, and remember, it's not about the pursuit of happiness, but the happiness within the pursuit.